Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and all distinguished guests and excellencies. It is such a pleasure to have you here, and welcome to the 2025 Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum held by CSIS Indonesia and the Australian National University Indonesia project. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please give a big round of applause for this event. Before we commence to the event, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Nadia Daulay, and I will be your host for today. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and excellencies, to start our event, please join me in welcoming Bapak Yose Rizal Damuri, the Executive Director of CSIS Indonesia, to give his remarks.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, speakers, colleagues, very good morning to you all. It is a pleasure actually to welcome you to our event, to CSIS, and also to our events, Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum 2025. This forum is an annual event actually convened by CSIS and also the Australian National University to commemorate the work of Pak Hadi and contributions of Pak Hadi Soesastro, one of the founders of CSIS. Especially this event try to acknowledge his invaluable contribution to CSIS, to Indonesia, to the relations between Indonesia and Australia, as well as to perhaps also to the integrations of the regions here in East Asia and Pacific. Pak Hadi was well known to be one of the pioneers of these integrations in the East Asia and Pacific. So allow me to extend a warm welcome to all the distinguished speakers here, especially Pak Yusuf Wanandi, the Vice Chair of Board of Trustee, CSIS Foundation, Pak Sofian Wanandi, also member of Board of Trustee, Pak Hasan Wirayuda, the member of Board of Trustee, Pak Djisman, the chair of CSIS Foundation, who also kindly enough to becomes the one of the discussions actually for this today's lectures. To Mas Luki, also to colleagues from the ANU, the Indonesia project. I see here the very famous professor of the Indonesia project, Pak Halhil. Thank you very much for coming here to Jakarta, and also to CSIS, Pak Halhil, Pak Budi Rekso Sudarmo, Professor Budi Rekso Sudarmo, also to the family of Pak Hadi, represented here by August Soesastro. Thank you, August, to come here. Also to always come every year to our Hadi Soesastro lecture. Your presence here really means a lot for us. And also, of course, warmest welcome to our special guest today, Jenny Gordon, from Lowy Institute and the ANU, who agreed to become the speaker of this year Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum. As well as to my colleague Titik Anas from University of Padjajaran. Thank you for agreeing to be the discussion, Titik. Yeah. Titik, you is also one of the protege of Pak Hadi. And our own Deputy Director, Shafiah Muhibat, as a moderator of the sessions. Well, the theme of the lecture today is about institutions. I think this theme really resonates very well to the current situations where institutions at global and national level have been challenged and perhaps recalibrated by various factors. Often that situation's putting us at risk of not having proper institution actually, and already disrupt many aspects of our life. But more than that, the team also represents one of the interests of Pak Hadi Soesastro. In many occasions, Pak Hadi always place a lot of attention to institutional developments, both here in Indonesia as well as in the broader regions of East Asia and Pacific. In one of his papers, it's called Governance and Crisis in Indonesia, Pak Hadi actually observed that one factor behind Indonesia's terrible and long terrible situation in the aftermath of Asia financial crisis was the neglections of institutional developments in economic area as well as on the political arena during the previous New Order era. Pak Hadi even terms the coin institutional involution, where institutions lost their independence and become part of the system of governance that was increasingly more patrimonial and paternalistic in nature. Institutions simply, according to Pak Hadi, became the instruments to serve some groups in order for them to stay in power, to remain in power. So the institutions do not really provide a lot of benefits to the betterments of economy, the betterments of the society. So I believe today, in today's lectures, we will be able to learn more about the importance of institution from Jenny and to come up with recommendations and actions that would lead to proper institutions for the advancements of productivity, national security, social stability, and economic sustainability. It's a very broad terms, but I believe this is very important for us to start thinking about it. So I wish you a very good discussion today, but in these occasions, I also would like to express my deepest appreciation for our long-time collaborations with the Indonesia project and also the Australian National University. I hope we will have this stronger collaborations in the future, and we will have more and next year and the later years Hadi Soesastro policy forums together with the ANU again. Thank you very much. Have a good discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Yose, for your warm and welcoming remarks. Next, I would like to invite Professor Budi Resosudarmo, the head of the ANU Indonesia project, to give his remarks. Please, Pak Budi.
Friend and colleague, welcome to the Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum 2025. My appreciation to leaders of CSIS, to the family of Pak Hadi, and to many friends that come to this occasion. So we have been conducted together with CSIS Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum since 2013. So it has been, this is probably the 13th or the 12th Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum. And for that, ANU Indonesia project would like to thank CSIS for allowing us to conduct this activity together to honor Pak Hadi Soesastro for his intellectual contribution and many of his initiatives in various aspects of thinking and policy development in Indonesia, and particularly to encourage more research on making better Indonesia. So this time, the Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum will be part of our celebration. Indonesia project this year is 60 years. So we conduct a week activities. Yeah, thank you. We conduct a week activities in Canberra 2 weeks ago, and now we conduct a week activities in Jakarta to provide a stronger foundation so that we could collaborate better throughout many years to come. So the Indonesia project, for those who do not know, we conduct research, of course. We got a strong PhD program, and many of who graduated from our program are here, including Mbak Titi, that's going to be the discussion. And we also got a lot of other research activities, including inviting Indonesian academics to Canberra to collaborate. We also conducting various training. But the bigger part of Indonesia project is actually about disseminating knowledge and encouraging more research activities in Indonesia. So Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum is one of the main one that we conduct in Indonesia, particularly to encourage Indonesia to more critically thinking about our development, and also more independent in giving your opinion in public. We also did similar activities with LPM. We call it Sadly lecture. We also conducted similar activities in Gajah Mada. We call it Mubiarto Public Policy Forum. And we also conducted in Andalas on regional development in Indonesia. We call it Hendra Asmara lecture. So those are our main activities in Indonesia, but our two main flag activities still the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies that we published since 1965. By now, the chief editor is Indonesian, Firman Witular. So the transformation of the Indonesia project is have been quite okay. And the activities during this week are as follow. Next. So yesterday, we conduct a special Forum Kajian Pembangunan. Forum Kajian Pembangunan is a collaboration between NU Indonesia project with about 15 Indonesian institutions, in which this institution take turn in hosting the Forum Kajian Pembangunan. Yesterday was special because we are inviting 3 of our alumni to talk about current Indonesian policy. They are Arif Yusuf, that currently in Dewan Ekonomi Nasional. Rahman Witular is in the Ministry of Finance, but now is in AMRO, and Desi Pani is in Bappenas. And then in the afternoon, we talk about climate change. And today, we have this Soesastro Policy Forum, consists of 2 activities. One is, in the morning, is Hadi Soesastro lecture. And in the afternoon, we are going to launch our update book, which is the Indonesia Update Conference, is our other flagship. It is the biggest conference on Indonesia outside Indonesia. That is what we claim. Yeah, about 400 people come to Canberra every year, and by now it's about 1,000 people watching through Zoom. And we're going to launch last year topic of the update. Every year we make it as a book, and this time the topic and the book that we're going to launch is Pak Jokowi 10 years presidency. Tomorrow we are going to launch another book. It's a book in honor of Peter Macaulay. Peter Macaulay is used to be the head of Indonesia project. He is the second head of Indonesia project, and then worked in various positions, and his last position is in ADBI, so we collaborate with ADBI in producing the book. Hal Hill is the editor, together with Daniel Surya Dharma, which is also our product. And on Friday, this is our last activities. We provide an opportunity for all academics to meet the chief editor of the Bulletin, to provide, to get some tips, yeah, how to publish an article in the bulletin. The bulletin is not only an economic journal, it is also, it's basically a development journal. And the journal position at the moment is not that bad. Its impact factor is about 2. It is in Q1 in economics and development subject. So if you would like to meet and get some tip on how to publish in an article in the journal, you might want also to come to that session, which is we conducted in LPEM, Jakarta. So with that, again, I would like to thank all of you for coming to this event, and please come also to our other event, particularly this afternoon, and hope you could enjoy the discussion that we organized this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Budi. I would like to ask to stay on the stage so that we can do a photo session alongside with Pak Budi. I'd also like to invite Pak Yose up onto the stage, Pak Budi, Ibu Shafiah Muhibat, Bu Fifi, Mrs. Jenny Gordon, Pak Djisman Simandjuntak, Ibu Titik Anas, and also Pak Hadi Soesastro up on the stage for a photo session. Please join us. Thank you very much for joining us for the photo. You may return to your seats. We have now reached the main event, the Hadi Soesastro Lecture. To moderate the session, I have the honor to invite Ibu Dr. Shafiah F. Muhibat, the Deputy Executive Director for Research, CSIS Indonesia, to moderate the session. Please. A round of applause for our moderator today.
Okay. Very good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to moderate this session, Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum for 2025. It's one of the big events that CSIS holds, and it's a pleasure to see that the attendance is always plenty each and every year. Let me just give you very shortly a little bit of story. When I first joined CSIS as a very junior researcher, it was in December 2000. Pak Hadi Soesastro was the executive director of CSIS. So I remember going in for an interview, I was introduced to him, and he was always a very fatherly figure to everyone at CSIS. And I remember very fondly Pak Hadi's interaction with us, all of us, me and my batch at the time, all the junior researchers just joining CSIS, learning how to do research, learning how to expand our knowledge. And he was always a brilliant mentor to all of us. And I think that's something that still we all remember very fondly of Pak Hadi, of first of all being a mentor, and second of all being a father to all of us, the researchers at the time. So Agus, we share Pak Hadi as our fathers as well at CSIS. So that's one of the things that I remember very fondly. And trying to relate that to our topic for today, talking about institutions, I recall I used to like sitting next to Pak Hadi when we have conferences. So I learned a lot when I sit next to him. And one of the things that Pak Hadi always used to do is he listens to when people speaking, but he doodles. He loved doodling. All kinds of things he would doodle. And when you sit next to him, sometimes at the end of the conference, you get the end result of the doodle. And one of the things that he did, the conference was on ASEAN. And the session was talking about the alphabet soup of ASEAN, the different kinds of platforms that exist in the ASEAN cooperation. So the AIS, the ARF, and everything, all the soup. And Pak Hadi was doodling, trying to make a circle chart of all of these different platforms, all of this different alphabet soup. And in the end, the result was a doodle of a heart that consists of all the different circle charts of all ASEAN platforms. And I think that was one of the nicest things that I've ever seen anyone trying to explain the complexity of ASEAN in such a manner that everyone can understand and actually enjoy. So back to our discussion today, definitely as Pak Yose has mentioned, institutions, regional cooperation is at the heart of Pak Hadi's work throughout his life. And it is an honor for me to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Jenny Gordon. Dr. Gordon is an honorary professor at POLIS, the Center for Social Policy Research at the Australian National University, and he is also a non-resident fellow at the Lowy Institute, one of Australia's leading think tanks on foreign policy. Dr. Gordon was the chief economist at DFED up to 2021, joining DFED from Noyce Group, where she was the chief economist. So I think today, Dr. Gordon will explore the relationship between institutions, trust, and development. And I think when discussing institutions at the current time, when we are seeing we are filled with global uncertainties, I think we are back to the very basic question, why institutions matter. And I hope that, Dr. Gordon will explain to us exactly why institutions matter. So I have the honor to please welcome Dr. Jenny Gordon up to the stage.
There we go. That's the first one. Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here today and talk about something that I have long really thought was incredibly important, and economists tend to kind of take them for granted. So it's a great time to re-engage with the whole institution story. So it's really important here to be that this lecture is honouring Pak Hadi Soesastro, and he died in 2010. And it was interesting for me, I'd never met him. I wish I had now. So I was reading up on what people had written about him. And he was clearly one of Indonesia's leading scholars in international economics and regional affairs. And as had been mentioned, for many years, he was the executive director here at CSIS. But he was a real friend of the Indonesia project as well. And so a couple of weeks ago when we had the celebrations, it was just wonderful how much everyone seemed to be remembering him and saying how important he was and how much they miss him. And I thought, looking back and trying to sort of understand who this person was, Peter Macaulay's words really captured the feeling that I heard a couple of weeks ago at that Indonesia project meetings. And this is his words. It was, what his hundreds of Australian friends will miss most is the warmth of Hadi's presence, his unfailing grace, his smile, his gentle chuckle when recounting the latest Jakarta anecdote, and his keen insights on current trends in Indonesia and the world. And for a person like that, I wish I'd known him, and it's a real honour to be giving this lecture in his memory. Okay, I want to talk about institutions. Institutions really matter. So this is my take on a sort of a plan of the institutions. They're all around us. They're essential for human society to function. We invented institutions to coordinate social and economic activities. And we cede control to an institution because it enables us to cooperate on setting the rules for how we live and work together. There's a lot of different types of institutions. Some are informal, and there are social norms that really govern the behaviour of all of them. Some are formal, where society has delegated the governance role to a group of people to make rules and enforce them on our behalves. Some, like religious institutions in many countries, lack a legal mechanism to control their members, and so they rely on an informal control mechanism. These work because people value belonging to the group, and expulsion from the group is the ultimate punishment. And so the greater the value of belonging to that group in an informal institution, the bigger the cost of expulsion, and hence the greater willingness to abide by the rules. But I'm not going to talk about these sorts of informal institutions today. I'm going to talk about governing institutions. So governing institutions have legal mechanisms to enforce their rules, and though expulsion still remains a threat. A well-respected institution may only need to provide information on acceptable behaviour to bring their members into line. They may only need to issue warnings to get compliance. And in some cases, institutions have to step up compliance activities and issue fines, cease and desist orders. When this fails, the institution can bring in the big guns of civil and criminal action. These are well-known steps in something called the regulatory pyramid. So the nature of our governing institutions reflects society's preferences, or in situations where an elite dominate, the preferences of the elite. Democracy requires that elites pay attention to the preferences of society. Whoa, I think the heavens are opening up out there. So while autocracies have more tools to quash dissent, they risk revolution if they move too far away from society's preferences for too long. Governing institutions may be able to resist pressure for change, but become increasingly vulnerable to natural and other disruptions. It was a bad harvest in 1788 that triggered the French Revolution, but it was the long-term grievances around high taxation, inequality and extreme poverty that created the pressure for change. An institution's stability depends on society's acceptance of the institution's authority to govern, to set the rules and enforce them on the members' behalf. This acceptance is contingent on the governing institutions managing the risks posed to society. These risks include natural disasters, pandemics, economic insecurity, as well as threats from malign state and non-state actors. The majority of a country's people may accept an authoritarian system if it keeps them safe. This is why martial law is generally accepted during times of war, and why strong men leaders can survive in countries at risk of sectarian violence. Governments have a limited set of tools to manage the risks that come. They can tax, transfer, invest, and regulate the behaviour of people, businesses, civil society, and other organisations. Governments make laws and fund bureaucracies to enforce these laws. Bureaucracies, regulators, follow the regulatory pyramid in enforcing these laws. The judicial system provides the ultimate enforcement mechanism with the power to seize assets, imprison and compel. Markets rely on some of these laws, in fact, contract law, consumer protection laws, labour standards, to actually operate. Without this, you can't actually have markets. Oh, sorry about that. So trust really matters for productivity and social stability. And it is the extent to which people trust their institutions is positively correlated with better social and economic outcomes. The night chart just showing those correlations. But causality runs both ways, as trust is earned when governing institutions deliver on their promises, and trust makes it easier for governing institutions to operate efficiently and effectively. Trust works because it lowers the transaction costs of governing. Many governing institutions are so familiar they're almost invisible, and we only engage with them when we disagree or break the rules. The rules of the road come to mind. We delegated control to the state, which drew up road rules and established the traffic police to enforce them. Money is another institution we've delegated to the state to operate on our behalf. To ensure that money remained trustworthy, states established independent central banks to manage the supply of money, and they tasked them with price stability. An inflation target is a way for the state to control the central bank, in a way that central bank independence is a way to prevent politicians from printing money for short-term political gain and longer-term inflation. International institutions have a much more limited set of tools. They depend on member country governments to make and enforce the laws to abide by international agreements. What the institutions offer is the means for cooperation in designing the rules that member countries sign up to. They may have mediating power to resolve disputes. The World Trade Organization, for example, offers trade dispute resolution where one country believes another has violated the agreed trade rules. You can see where I'm going with this one. Some, like the International Monetary Fund, offer carrots, loans, but others also sticks, making loans conditional on government policy change. Ultimately, international institutions only work when their member countries agree to abide by the institution's authority. Economic institutions are central to productivity growth, as they allow us to both cooperate and compete more efficiently and effectively in a market economy. This balance is actually really important, and economists forgot it. Focusing so much on competition, they forgot about cooperation. And you need cooperation to get the rules right, that you can then have competition for resources, customers and workers' time, and that will then help allocate those resources efficiently. Markets are a mechanism for price discovery, but exchange requires institutions that can enforce contracts. Formal institutions, from money to contract law enforcement to financial regulation, develop to support arm's-length transactions. As transactions become more complex, so too does the tasks required of our governing economic institutions. Transactions, the exchange of goods, services, capital, knowledge and people cross borders, we need the international institutions to govern these transactions in ways that are predictable and inspire confidence in the good faith of the parties to the transaction. The Washington Consensus was the 10 things that economically successful countries had done, put the emphasis on macroeconomic stability and free and open markets as the magic formula for economic growth. It took the institutions to do this for granted. But the development literature put much more emphasis on institutions, emphasising good governance, institutions that could uphold a rule of law as foundational for markets to function. Macroeconomic stability requires an independent central bank to maintain price stability, and markets need a legal system that can enforce contracts so that trade and investment can expand beyond the limits of a trusted partner. Economic growth also needs investment in human capital, health, education, in infrastructure to deliver services such as water, sanitation, power, communications, transport, and in research to generate the knowledge capital. The private sector struggles to cooperate on these big investments because they cannot directly capture the benefits. Society gave government the power to tax and spend so that it could invest in things that the private sector could not cooperate to deliver. These public goods provide free inputs into private production through the coordination of regulation, greater access to knowledge, skilled workers, foundational infrastructure services, and lower costs of undertaking finance and commercial exchange. So governing institutions can really help drive a virtuous productivity cycle. Government's role is in investing in the resources, the people who raise human capital and public goods, and regulating markets to promote competition. It is competition that drives that effective allocation of resources into production that people actually want to consume. Trade offers greater scale that allows adoption of better technology as well as boosting competition, while foreign investment expands the access to resources. A country's external relationships are part of a national security suite of policies, and members of international institutions play an important role in national security, as they do in promoting trade and investment. So I've got a nice little kind of 4-part model. Environmental sustainability, national security, productivity growth, and social stability are the 4 things that we need to get right, and they all have virtuous feedback loops and vicious feedback loops, and policy should be about putting us on the positive, virtuous feedback loops and not on the vicious ones. In many countries, the role of government expanded from economic coordination and the public input funder to social insurance. Social insurance, such as age pension and unemployment insurance, can be seen as a response to inequality in outcomes. Public support for education and healthcare can reduce inequality in opportunity. Different societies have different preferences over what level of inequality is tolerated, but governments that don't deliver on the expected level of redistribution face social instability. Social instability intersects with the productivity feedback loop because it matters for trust in governing institutions, as well as being a key input into human capital and consumer and investor confidence. So the problem with markets is that they don't care about the distribution of gains, right? They're agnostic to the distribution of gains, and they reward talent and capital. So the initial distribution of resources, whether land, physical capital, financial capital, or human capital, is rarely uniform across people in society. Markets reward people who own these factors of production. And so the distribution of benefits reflects the initial ownership as well as how hard people work and the risks they're willing to take. And Thomas Piketty really put this nicely in his book, that all else equal, the distribution of wealth becomes more unequal over time. So productivity growth has been the primary source of rising wages, but in recent years, a growing subset of workers are being left behind because the gains are being increasingly captured by a subset of workers and the owners of capital. And we saw an excellent chart here, yes, for Indonesia, that had median wages going like this and productivity growth going like this. So clearly the median worker wasn't capturing that productivity growth. Very telling chart. So we've got to worry about the bottom 40%. Events that disrupt social stability, like events that disrupt national security, are costly to economic growth because they disrupt that virtuous cycle. Environmental services are a free input into production, and so environmental sustainability also matters for productivity growth. And there's growing evidence that the decline in environmental services due to climate change, overuse, and other sources of degradation is a growing drag on productivity growth. Local, regional, and global cooperation are needed to reverse these trends. This is another task of international institutions, notably the Paris Accord, have been established to address. So there is a virtuous feedback loop in a well-functioning institutions that build trust and function more effectively due to trust. But the problem is that declining trust undermines their effectiveness. Trust is a lubricant that helps institutions work effectively and efficiently. Confidence that rules will be applied and enforced fairly, or at least within an acceptable limit, matter for economic decision makers, as well as for society's acceptance. As power tends to come with wealth, there'll be rising pressure on institutions to reflect the preferences of those in power. If institutions don't have a self-correcting mechanism to resist these pressures, the rules will evolve in ways that favour the powerful at a cost to the rest of society. While conspiracy theories about pedophiles headquartered under a pizza parlour in Washington, D.C. have no basis in reality, the influence of big money on politics and on economic policy is only too real. Governing institutions can build trust by delivering on their promises. Continued failure to deliver, whether due to corruption, incompetence, overpromising, undermines the effectiveness of these institutions, and loss of trust, whether warranted or not, has been rising in many countries. So I've got in the chart, there's the US, which you can see the decline in trust in the US government, and then the other chart is the rather sad, there's not very many people in the dark blue end of the 100% of people trust their share of government. A lot don't trust them very much. And then the next slide is just sort of really looking at corruption and how dangerous that is for economic growth, really. So we live in a dynamic world where what is acceptable social and economic behaviour changes over time. Whoops. Growth in productivity in agriculture, for example, allowed women to spend less time farming and more time on household work. The boom in household appliances enabled by an electric power grid then freed women from household work to work outside the home. Economic change induces social change by changing opportunity. And economic growth allows people to move up the Maslow hierarchy of needs as food and shelter and economic security become available to more people in society. Governing institutions need to evolve to reflect the changing social norms and rising economic complexity coming from technology and trade. But there are always people who like the status quo and do not want to change. Protectionism is a pushback against structural change that technology and trade bring. Change can be delayed, but it's inevitable. And institutions that work to facilitate change help societies avoid crises where the old institutions end up being destroyed before new ones more fit for purpose can be established. Climate change, shifting global economic power, rising power and risks from network technology, and political discontent from inequality are increasing pressure on our institutions at the local, national, and international levels. The interconnected nature of economic activity, global consequences of climate-related risks, and the threat of global pandemics mean that it's not enough for an individual country's institutions to evolve. International institutions need to do so too. So I want to talk now about the importance of international economic institutions and where we're going. So in the 2 centuries prior to World War II, colonial rule was the dominant institutional approach to global trade and investment. This might is right approach was mostly extractive. With the exception of settler colonial systems, the governing institutions were not supported by the majority of the population in the countries under colonial rule. Disruption was inevitable. It took 2 world wars and many uprisings to bring about change. The human and economic cost was massive. Post-World War II, governments established the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank Group, the International Monetary Fund, and later the World Trade Organization, which grew out of the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade. And these were established what is now known and called the International Rules-Based Order. These institutions and other under the United Nations, such as the standard-setting institutions like the World Intellectual Property Organization and International Telecommunications Union, facilitated trade and capital flows across countries. Capital, whether it's financial, physical, and intellectual, is reluctant to move across borders unless investors have confidence that the countries will play by the rules. The value of capital movements in promoting growth creates a virtuous cycle where governments have an incentive to play by the rules for the productivity and employment benefits that trade and foreign investment bring. So globalisation has been really effective in driving down absolute poverty, as the chart on the right shows. But you can see in the chart on the left that trade has effectively sort of stabilised as a percentage of GDP since the global financial crisis. And we've seen a convergence in economic outcomes over the 30 years from 1990 to 2020, but since 2020, countries have stopped converging. So this is a testament to the importance of these institutions, but they are by no means perfect and potentially could have done far more to level up economic outcomes across countries. But without these institutions, most, if not all countries and their people would be much poorer. So not everybody is going to be a winner. Globalisation and development assistance has left some countries behind. Countries are at different stages of economic development, have different capacities to deliver on human capital and the infrastructure and to fund social insurance. The World Bank Group and the multilateral development banks are part of that international response to this lack of capacity. Through these international institutions, richer countries can cooperate to assist poorer countries to reduce extreme poverty and to improve the opportunity for these countries to develop their economies. But the effectiveness of these programs in strengthening domestic governing institutions has been questioned, and rising indebtedness is raising concerns about the sustainability of the concessional lending approach. These concerns about international institutions are not new. You can see does the IMF have a future back in 1998? And then you have the Centre for Global Development writing that by 2025 there will be no more need because most countries will have graduated out of the very low income level. Unfortunately, that hasn't proved to be the case. But they've faced criticism, and criticism is not a bad thing. And Indonesia would know well that the IMF response to the Asian financial crisis, where they imposed government austerity on affected countries despite the problems being caused by private sector debt default, attracted reasonable criticism as well as suggestions for reform. This led to a lot of rethinking, including such as short-term capital controls potentially being a good thing. So the large voting shares that you have of the developed West relative to the global South, and the historical appointment of a European to head the IMF, an American to head the World Bank, is also routinely raised as a point of tension. Criticism is important, as institutions should be able to learn and evolve. The challenge is when members want different things from the institutions, and the challenge is even greater when people lose trust in those institutions, and this has been happening. You can see there's changes in trust in the UN really generally going down, definitely the wrong direction in terms of a favourable view of the UN. It's very interesting in the middle one, the trust by political affiliation, is that in developed countries, the right mistrusts the UN institutions more than the left do, but in developing countries, it's the other way around. The left mistrusts the institutions more than the right do. So there's at least 3 reasons for this loss of trust. The first is the argument that institutions have strayed away from their mandate, forgetting that their power depends on their members' permission. So, for example, some have critiqued the IMF's increasing focus on the risks of climate change as being outside the mandate. Growing requirements on gender, disability and labour and environmental standards for World Bank lending is seen by some as unwarranted interference, and they certainly slow down the disbursement of loans. But where an expansion of mandate is a response to changing circumstances, such as the impact of climate risks on financial stability, the evolving mandate may actually be a healthy evolution. But where an expanded mandate reflects some members' values and not others, or bureaucratic creep that often rises in organisations, there is less justification. The ultimate judgment lies in whether the majority of members support the expanded mandate and whether the institution is best placed to deliver these new objectives. The second reason for loss of trust is that institutions are unable to adjust and adapt as geopolitical circumstances change. This is most apparent with the shift of global economic power towards China, but a wide array of voices from the Global South have been demanding a greater say. The third and most problematic reason for the decline in trust in multilateral institutions is that the international institutions have become a political scapegoat. The slow response of the WHO to declare COVID-19 a pandemic raised the ire of some developed countries, while the failure of the WHO to ensure a more equitable distribution of vaccines raised the ire of many developing countries. The pandemic was challenging for all governments, and the best strategies were not readily apparent. But rather than learn from policy failures, some governments and political players have sought refuge in blaming the WHO, to the point at which my older sister, who has kind of gone down the right-wing rabbit hole, sent me something where line by line some Swiss lawyer who's never worked on international health, never worked in an international institution, was saying, take this line, totally out of context, it demonstrates that WHO is evil. So that's the sort of stuff that's circulating in social media. So being able to blame the international institutions has occasionally been useful, such as when necessary but unpopular reforms can be blamed on loan conditionality. But while useful politically, assigning blame becomes problematic when it undermines trust in the institutions that we need to make markets operate efficiently and at least relatively fairly. More generally, loss of trust in international institutions mirrors doubts about the benefits of globalisation. This is most problematic where governments have not managed the consequences of structural change, whether it's caused by trade or technology, or shared the productivity gains more equally across members in society. It's easier to blame globalisation, and by extension the institutions that represent collective efforts to promote and manage globalisation, than to address the problems at home. Populism and nationalism are attractive narratives for societies experiencing widening inequality and social instability. And the US is the biggest challenge. Populism embraces simple solutions to complex problems. Slowing migration, or at the extreme end deporting migrants, is not a solution to wage stagnation for low-skilled workers, nor does reducing the share of migrants in a community reduce the level of crime. Tariffs and other barriers to trade will not bring back well-paid manufacturing jobs. Cutting taxes, especially on the rich, does not pay for itself through higher growth rates, and those are all in the Trump agenda. Most government bureaucracies that manage social insurance programs are actually not bloated, and the programs rarely have high rates of fraud. Rather, the inefficiencies reflect a history of underinvestment in data and client management technologies and accumulation of processes aimed at preventing those who are ineligible from accessing payments, stopping a type 2 rather than a type 1 error. But the hyped and mostly false emotive narratives that we see peddled on social media, on the left as well as on the right, and the rejection of experts who seek to correct the record make populist approaches really hard to counter. The US really provides a case study in the damage that populism does to government institutions. The Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency has cut public agency funding and suspended and fired bureaucrats. The grievance doctrine pursued by Trump has seen media businesses, law firms, and universities sued and excluded from government contracts and funding. The chilling effect on firms and organisations undermines civil institutions, such as social norms around freedom of speech, due process, tolerance, and diversity. This undermining of domestic institutions is repeated in the international sphere. The Trump administration's on-off-on tariffs have violated the US bilateral and multilateral trade agreements, including adherence to WTO rules. The Trump administration has also signalled withdrawing from the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Accord, and most recently UNESCO. It's unclear what funding they will give to the World Bank, given the severe cuts that they have given to USAID. All this and US trade policy are driving global uncertainty. The current slew of deals being done lack detail and have little, if any, win-win that trade agreements can deliver. The mandate for additional investment by Japan and the EU in the US under US control, and if Trump is to be believed with a tax rate of 90%, completely undermines the market mechanisms for the allocation of international capital. These investments, if they do go ahead, start looking like tithes paid to an almighty king. Despite the inherent tension between the US moving towards a mercantilist stance on the one hand and a more isolationist stance on the other, neither's good for global prosperity. But it is a wake-up call to other countries that the rules-based system, and by extension the international organisations that support it, is worth saving. The loss of positive leadership and the power of the US funding is costly, but the US has clearly moved away from champion to spoiler. The resulting interregnum offers an opportunity for other members to negotiate on what the next evolution of these institutions should be. Success in finding a way forward depends on countries being willing to put common interests in global prosperity ahead of political interests and short-term gains. So the West should really be invested in reforming the current system. I really love this quote that I came across by a Singapore diplomat, Kishore Mahbubani, and I think he belled the cat with the observation that the West really believe in the principles of an open liberal system. They would do better supporting the evolution of the current institutions than by withdrawing or insisting that change be resisted. So we really, I'll let you read that for yourselves, but to sell the necessary compromise to countries and their people requires restoring trust in those international institutions. So what comes next? Is it about the BRICS and a new world order? As the US withdraws, China's been working to expand its ties with UN agencies, including the World Bank. In 2018, China established China International Development Cooperation Agency and signalled a move away from primarily bilateral approach to development assistance pursued under Belt and Road to a triangular development cooperation. Under this model, China collaborates with developing country and a multilateral development institution in delivering support. So in 2021, China founded the Global Development Initiative, and half the projects under it are done jointly with the UN agency. China's insistence on non-conditionality and non-interference is often welcomed by a recipient country, but can be a point of tension. Some view China's focus on development first as in conflict with the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which requires that human rights not be put off until some level of development is achieved. While the BRI focused on infrastructure progress, contracted to Chinese firms and financed by loans, the triangular approach has seen China move into other types of projects, such as the recently announced third country training program for ASEAN and Timor-Leste, with Singapore providing training in governments. So the US, unfortunately, will continue to dominate on international finance. So we're going to have to work out how to design an international system where the US dollar remains the reserve currency, at least for some time. So China's influence in the international, on the development side, institutions is rising. It faces a much more difficult task in expanding influence in the international economic institutions. There's currently no substantial alternative to SWIFT, which is the international payment system, or the US dollar. A reserve currency needs to be convertible with a deep and liquid bond market to support the management of government and private sector reserves and financial derivatives markets. The renminbi is not convertible, and neither the euro or the yen have the depth of financial market instruments that the US offers. Recent developments in the US raise concerns about the reliability of the US dollar system. The Genius Act establishes a legal basis for stablecoins. This is likely to drive up the demand for US treasuries because stablecoins have to hold reserves in a liquid asset, ideally denominated in US dollars. But as stablecoins increasingly provide an alternative for the US dollar denominated SWIFT payment system, this will reduce demand for US dollars as the reserve currency, but the net effect is going to be uncertain. So instead of holding your US dollars reserves in banks and the like, you'll transact, the stable coins will hold, owners will hold them, and you'll transact in stable coins. And more concerning is the threat to US reserve independence and prospects for US inflation, since we are going to be benchmarked against the dollar for quite some time. So such developments, which echo the end of the fixed exchange rate system in the early 1970s, would likely be even more disruptive to the global economy than at the time, given the greater extent of integration. The US emerged in the 1970s as the dominant currency, but whether it would this time around is highly uncertain. What really seems to be concerning, I like this quote from Paul Krugman. This was back in his days as a junior on the Reagan administration. He was saying, if you did something, it used to be, but that's GATT illegal, you can't do it. And now, nobody seems to care. So the Trump administration's violation of its trade agreements gives permission for others to do likewise. And despite the rhetoric of President Xi on the importance of the international rules-based order, China's willingness to use economic coercion also reduces confidence that will uphold the rules that it finds inconvenient. Australia was on the receiving end of a number of sanctions in 2020 that restricted access to the Chinese market, so we know this well. And despite using anti-dumping and other excuses, these sanctions were clearly in violation of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. China's also used control over critical minerals to extract concessions with Japan, Korea, and most recently, quite effectively with the US as a bargaining chip. So while their rhetoric is supportive of the multilateral system, it's unclear what they're going to demand for that support. The strategic competition between US and China has fueled a race for technological dominance. The US has sought to slow China's advance in AI and other technologies with military applications by restricting their access to high-end chips and the machines that make them. The US has also sought to limit its exposure to cyber attack by banning Huawei 5G and imposing market-ending tariffs on electric Chinese vehicles. Australia led the way on banning Huawei 5G, citing security concerns, but they've not shown the same concerns about China's electric vehicles. We rather like them. Most countries in the region, including Indonesia and Australia, want to be able to draw on both US and Chinese technologies. Being forced to choose in real or perceived interests of national security is going to be costly to productivity. And national security is increasingly being used to justify policies that have more than a populist tint. Like the populist economic policies that are a response to social instability, economic policies justified on national security grounds might fail to deliver as promised. It is up to the economic and civil institutions to find alternatives that do deliver on productivity, social stability, and national security. International cooperation is going to be really important in helping these things work. So the real question is, how can we restore a role for international economic institutions and avoid Kindleberger's spiral? So Kindleberger's spiral was this increasing rise of tariffs over the period as things got worse and worse and worse. So by the 1930s, it was clear that the governing institutions had failed. The US failed to regulate banking sector excess, leading to the crash of Wall Street and the beginning of the Great Depression. The US government reaction was to implement the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which cut trade, but failed to stimulate domestic production because the problem was lack of demand, not of supply. The US had not joined the post-World War I League of Nations, which also excluded Germany and the Soviet Union, so the League Act authority. But neither did it focus on commerce. The imposition of reparations under the Treaty of Versailles slowed Germany's recovery and is considered to have played a role in the rise of fascism, setting the conditions for World War II. The post-World War II Bretton Woods system put commerce at its centre, and it took a different approach to assisting war-torn nations and those emerging from colonisation. The system wobbled, as mentioned earlier, in the early 1970s, but emerged stronger to oversee a period of remarkable economic development. That was when the US dollar broke the nexus with the gold standard. So we need to do this again. We need to restore the rules around commerce that drive prosperity. This time round, though, we've got more problems. We've got a problem of the rising damage of, disasters, natural disasters, particularly climate-related. And then we've got a declining fertility freefall in most countries, so we've got a demographic issue as the world ages. And then the other problem we have is everything is connected. This is Jan Easterly, who is the Director of US Cybersecurity under the Biden administration, in a CSIS, not UCIS, the American CSIS talk. And she said, everything's connected, everything's interdependent, so everything is vulnerable, which is really kind of worrying. So somehow we're going to have to manage that very large risk. So we've got these big risks and these big challenges. So I sort of said, what are the priority areas for collective action where we really need global cooperation to do something about them? And coordination is really essential to address the problem of the global commons, not least reducing carbon emissions, but also management of the oceans, particularly plastic waste, which is ending up in them, and space. There's a heck of a lot of stuff flying around up there, and anybody, can stick it up at the moment, and, we need rules about how to actually use space. We need to reverse rising protectionism to promote global commerce. And the US tariffs really risk broader contagion, either in retaliation for trade diversion as countries impacted by US tariffs seek alternative markets, or because US actions imply permission to ignore trade agreements. We need to manage the evolution of the international payment system as it comes under pressure from US policy choices and potential destabilisation from cryptocurrencies and fintech, so the world can avoid another global financial crisis. We need to mitigate the cybersecurity risks of a digitally connected world that runs on data and communications, and managing the unprecedented power that these networks give to the big tech companies, mostly American. We need to provide support for countries and people affected by natural disasters and conflict, and we need to reduce the flows of refugees and economic migrants. And finally, we really need to limit contagion from zoonotic and other diseases to avoid global pandemics. There are 6 elements to reform of international institutions that I think are really important, that might help overcome the inertia and the resistance from the special interests in every country, so that we can actually reform the mandates of these international institutions and their approaches. The first element is to focus on the must-have for all countries. The list above deliberately omits many of the Sustainable Development Goals, despite their worthiness. This will require governments to make concessions on things that matter to their people, particularly in the West. Focusing the international institution mandates on a clear set of common interests will provide a sound starting point. The second element is packaging. We need to bring together reforms so that all countries get some wins that they can sell to their people. Not every change is win-win for all countries, particularly in the short run. The problem with considering each regulation and other impost individually is that countries push back on reforms affecting their specific interests. So we need to design packages where there's at least one win for every impost that would facilitate cooperation. The third element is funding. In an era of declining development assistance and rising indebtedness, many developing countries need financial support to participate in international institutions. They may also need technical and other support to comply with the agreed rules. Funding is always a challenging area, with recipient countries resenting conditionality and donor countries struggling to explain to their domestic constituents why providing funds is both moral and a good investment for their own security. The fourth element is communication. Transparency matters for restoring trust in both the international and domestic institutions. Governments need to have conversations with their public about why they are members of an international institution, what compromises they had to make, and what their country gains from membership. The narrative that international institutions are to blame for a country's problems might be politically useful, but it sets up a false promise that withdrawal or non-compliance is going to fix the problems. It also undermines the very institutions that are essential to finding the cooperative solution to common problems. The fifth element is research and evaluation. International institutions, like all governing institutions, should be subject to scrutiny. This scrutiny is most effective when based on sound, tested research rather than opinion polls and media beat-ups. Governments should be willing to invest in international institutions' research activities through supplying researchers and cooperation on data collection and project analysis. I think we've got one more. Oh, still up there. Okay. I've just lost it here. So 1.5 dialogues, such as, thank you, promoted by Project Indonesia and by CSIS, play a really valuable role in not only improving understanding, but in providing less formal conduits for exchange of ideas and for finding compromise solutions. So keep doing this good work. The final element is a collective approach to leadership. The G20 need to take the lead to reform the existing international institutions. While the Trump administration is in power, this must be done without US leadership. But even if the US wants to re-engage, the G20 need to develop a more robust approach to leadership. One option is to form troikas to lead each reform area for each major institutions, where you include at least one representative from Asia and one representative from the developing South. Reform of institutions takes time and should draw on the expertise of people who work there. But an institution's leaders need to be held to account to deliver on the agreed mandate within a reasonable time period. The G20 is the obvious forum for holding leaders of international institutions to account. Institutions need to prove their worth to regain trust. This means they need to deliver on their promises. The appeal of populism will wane as promises populist leaders make are impossible to keep. The danger is that politicians ramp up the rhetoric that the problems are caused by outsiders, migrants, other countries, and the regulatory tyrants that run the international institutions. They need to then come to provide cooperative solutions to big common problems. What we need to do, sorry, that's my 6 elements for reform. So we need to maximise the probability of the best scenario and avoid the worst scenario. So cooperative reform of the existing international institutions along the lines I've outlined raise the probability that we end up in the better place. That's the best case. This best case is where countries cooperate to set rules that they all comply with and cooperate to reduce global climate and the other risks. We should also be working really actively to avoid the worst, where countries are limited to the economic opportunities provided by their local hegemon in a polarised world with competition for network dominance and common resources. It's unclear whether muddling through, which is what we often do, is an option simply because of the magnitudes of the risks we need cooperation to management. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenny Gordon, for the wonderful keynote. So we've heard a lot about, starting off a rather somber note about the decline in trust and so on, but I think you ended with a very high note with presenting priority areas for collective action and also the 6 elements toward reform of international institutions. We have 2 discussants who would now join us on the stage. I would like to welcome, first of all, Professor Djisman Simandjuntak, who is currently he is the Executive Board of Prasetya Mulya Foundation and Chairman of the Board of Directors of CSIS Foundation. So welcome, Pak Djisman. Please take a seat. The second discussant is Dr. Titi Anas, who is a Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of and Business of Universitas Padjajaran. She was also Special Advisor to the Minister of Finance up to 2024. So welcome, Pak Djisman and Ibu Titi. Perhaps I can begin with you, Pak Djisman, if you have immediate responses or other remarks with regards to Professor Gordon's keynote. It's just next to you, yes.
Thank you, Jenny, for the very insightful presentation. For the start, I can only amplify the message you put in your few last slides. Need for cooperation and need to restore institutions or international cooperative institution. But it's not going to be easy. I remember Veblen saying that institution is rooted in one, ideology, and secondly, in technology change. And this year, Cheng Gangshu published a huge book on institutional genes. And the use of the word genes tells us how sticky institution is. And I think we are now at the crossroad, tipping point. On the one hand, we have US distancing itself from the institutions it established, or at least led to establish after World War II. We don't know what might happen after Trump, but right now, the entire international institutions, Bretton Woods institutions, in trade, in finance, etc., is thrown overboard. To me, the most sad development in this is the violation of MFN, most favored nation principle. The world negotiated very long for its acceptance in the Berlin Congress at the end of 19th century. But it's just violated so easily under President Trump. I cannot imagine how to manage world economy as large as we have now, with over 200 countries, if we have to do it unilaterally. Can you imagine 200 by 199? Can you imagine the complexity? So that's really a challenge. But technology change is also a problem, yeah? Daron Acemoglu emphasized the importance of technology change as a source of development, progress, but at the same time, technology progress, in a way, at least for a while, deteriorates inequality because of the adoption cycle. by definition, any new technology is adopted first by a very small number of innovators, and then followed by large number of followers, etc. So the question to us, is there any institution that we can rely on to make technology change more equality friendly? I think this is a very big question. On the other side of the equation, we have China gaining in importance. In fact, China adopted Bretton Woods institutions in 2000, and I think that was very instrumental in creating miraculous growth in China. But I think China also is shifting away from this institutional setting, at least after 2010. That's what I read in Cheng Gang-soo, a huge book. Now, having US and China the way they are behaving right now, what is it that we can do to approach the things that you put in your last slides, yeah, to reinvent cooperation? It's a must. There is no other way that the world can progress without cooperation. Everybody knows that. In a book on sociality, someone argues that, in fact, it's cooperation that contributes to whatever we have in terms of accumulation in our life. Because non-cooperative behaviors are mostly zero-sum game. If we are to enjoy positive-sum games, cooperation is a must. My suggestion is this. This is just cursory comment on your presentation. In evolutionary theory, they have this idea on evolutionary stable strategy. We cannot expect to change President Donald Trump. We cannot expect to change President Xi Jinping. And probably also one day we cannot expect to change Prime Minister Modi. What we can expect to do is to gang up among the willing. However limited our influence is, I think we can do something together. The Indonesia project is one. And I wonder if we can expand this project to become a truly Indonesia-Australia project. You see two logos here. We need to build bridges between these two logos, Indonesia and Australia. And I think we have done very little. We used to have Indonesia-Australia seminar, but we haven't had it for a long time now. And that will contribute to common knowledge that you touch upon your presentation. But maybe it's too small in a world that we live in now. So my suggestion has always been to elevate East Asia cooperation. After all, we have RCEP. And I think RCEP is open to extension, open to improvement, to become kind of RCEP plus, dealing with institutions of science cooperation, etc. Yeah? By the way, one of the problems facing the world today is the loss of politicians' trust in science. This is a problem. Antitrust politics, we see it in many places right now. So, Jenny, again, thank you very much for the very insightful presentation. I hope at least with this you help to re-strengthen the affinity to institution of openness that we have been enjoying in the last 8 years or so. And I hope that we can restore it at least gradually, starting with one Indonesia project and of course Indonesia-Australia project, but hopefully also East Asia cooperation. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Pak Djisman. Can I go directly to Ibu Titi, please?
Thank you very much, Fifi. First, I would like to thank you, CSIS, Yose, Fifi, Pak Yusuf, Pak Sofyan, for inviting me to come home so that I can listen to the very, very insightful speech of Professor Gordon. And thank you for Pak Budi as well, Indonesia project, that let me come home as well to ANU. So I totally agree with what Jenny already speak about, but I'd like to draw a little bit on another problem that we are facing as Indonesian. So yes, institution matters, but as an Indonesian, we know that we have issues with institution in Indonesia. Maybe I can help with one chart that I prepare on the quality of institution in Indonesia. So not only about the global issues that we are facing, that we have problem, but we also have problem in Indonesia. The first slide shows that in the past 20 years, we do improve in terms of institutional quality. But if we compare to, say, our peer, it's still not adequate. So maybe we go to the next slide. So if we compare, for example, we are in that red box that showing that we have issues with the quality of institution and governance. So how are we going to develop and participate in fixing the international institution to function as it used to without properly address our institutional quality? We have a study that shows that the poor institutional going to affect the productivity and the growth, the quality growth of the country. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So we use the indicators of informality. If you have poor institution, your people don't trust the institution, so the firm are going to avoid to be in the radar of the government, so they will keep being informal. If you are being informal, it means you are not in the system, you are not complying with the labor law, you are not complying to the social protection, you are not complying to the tax regime. With that, of course, you are going to be unable to access the formal market. Then it's going to be affecting productivity, which in turn is going to affect the quality of growth. Maybe we go to the next slide. So this is the picture of Indonesia where, of course, self-employment declined over time in the past 20 years or so, but we still have quite large number of people that is self-employed. If you are self-employed, you are probably not going to be paying tax, yeah. You are probably not going to be comply to the social security, social protection, and you're probably not going to comply to the labor law. And we have another slide showing that there is what is it, inverted U shape of the relationship between informality and GDP per capita, suggesting that up to the certain level, yes, being informal, you get higher growth, but until or after a certain point, you're going to have a declining prosperity. So having a good institution going to reduce your informality, going to get you into higher quality growth. Yeah. So that's the importance of institution as a country. Then I go to the comment on the importance of institution in international landscape. Of course, as developing countries like Indonesia, we benefit from opening up, from globalization, from WTO. And many developing countries benefited from WTO, from opening up. Pak Djisman already suggested that China after joining WTO, it accelerated, the growth is accelerated and become the Asian factory, becoming the enemy of US eventually. So, but of course, globalization, if it is not managed well, like Jenny already said, going to affect certain group of the community negatively. So if it is not managed well, some countries, yes, growing, but the distribution of the growth is not equitable. So we have issue. But of course, the trade policy cannot address all. So there has to be complementary policy to support when you are opening up. So I think because of one person that being elected by majority of, not majority, but win the election in the US, the already vulnerable global institution, as Jenny already outlined very clearly, becoming untrusted. So basically the trust to the international organization was already there before Trump came into power. And because the populism that he adopted, he withdrew from any. Actually, Indonesia disregard WTO first, I guess, yeah, with our nickel. But because we are not as big as US, I think the effect is limited compared to the US withdraw from the WTO, then Indonesia withdraw from, violated WTO. So with this loss in trust to multilateral system, I think, even our interpersonal relation, if we lost our trust to others, it's going to take a lot of time to regain the trust again. So I think expecting to have multilateral rule-based system going to work in the short term, in a few years, probably going to be very, very optimistic view. But I think we have to be kind of down to earth, rational, work within our limited space that is already showing kind of positive attitude to open trade or investment. I think this is relevant to what Pak Hadi already always advised, is about open regionalism. Ya Pak? Pak Hadi is advocating always on cooperate, yeah, whether it is in ASEAN or through PECC with APEC, yeah, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and others. So basically, these two cooperations still work. Even ASEAN has its RCEP and has so many cooperation with other countries through ASEAN. And Indonesia actually has several cooperation with other countries, including the neighbor Australia. However, some of my review on a number of cooperation suggested that there's huge untapped potential of the cooperation. So yes, we do have cooperation, but we didn't really use it up to the optimal level. So we don't treasure what we have until until the opportunity is gone. So don't let the opportunity gone. We have to use it and optimize what we have currently. So we start from small, the like-minded group, yeah? The like-minded group, the one that we still pro openness, and then work towards a greater cooperation. So I think, thank you very much, Jenny, for the talk. It's really, really insightful.
Thank you so much, Ibu Titi. So we've heard both from Pak Djisman and Ibu Titi. Thank you so much for the both of you for even enriching our already very rich discussion today. Due to time constraint, I have asked Jenny if it's okay that I go directly to the audience to invite more comments and questions, and then I'll give the floor to Jenny to respond to them all. So let me scan the room first for, please do put your hands up if you have any. So I'll have one at the very back, that one. Anyone from this side? Yes, Pak Budi. And then from this side? This side, no. Okay, that side? Okay, there's one, and then there, one. So, okay. Let me begin all the way from this one first. Can I have a mic? Would you kindly introduce yourself to Dr. Gordon?
Thank you very much, Mbak Vivi. My name is Andrew from International Relations Department. Thank you for a very wonderful presentations. And I understand from the talks that you have given that the existence of institution is deeply associated with the existence of trust. Well, the problem is, where is it coming from? Where the trust is coming from? Is it only reproduced by the way institutions create some sort of output and hence outcome? Or is it also coming from other sources that various sociologists has acknowledged? Like, for example, from values, from prestige, and so on and so forth. If that is actually the case, what if the current problem of our institutions, both at the domestic and global level, is coming from the fact that our very institution is not really able to capture different variant of expression, different sources of prestige, for example, which is sought by Donald Trump recently, and so on and so forth. What if the problem of the existing institutions is coming from the fact that since Washington Consensus era, all states and all thinkings is leading to acknowledging that learning that less is more, and it happens to the state, which is the governing institution that you mentioned. What if the current problem that we are having now is because all states are becoming too less and being unable to create the sort of trust important in society? Thank you.
Thank you. Pak Budi, can I have a microphone up to the front, please?
Yes, thank you, Jenny, for insightful presentation. My question is I agree that cooperation, you put a stress that cooperation is a key of those growth and so on. But cooperation consists of individuals. And this individual are institution within this individual also matters for the international institution or not. And if it is matter, which one is the direction? Should we have all members have the right institution, then we could have international institution, or international institution actually could force that individual institution. But so far, it seems to me when some of individual is not having the right institution, the whole cooperation doesn't work. So, need your opinion about that.
Thank you, Pak Budi. Third question, I think it was Wafa. Was it you? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Wafa here from CSIS. My question is also to Professor Gordon. So I'm just interested in one of the slides that you give us. When during Reagan era, there was an Australian negotiator. You can give check to the U.S. negotiator by saying that, oh look, they're GATT illegal, and then it stops there, right? And I agree with you that yes, the role of institution is also to give these checks against indecent behaviors, against abnormal interactions, right? And so my question is, of course, about Australia, I guess, or the discussion in Australia, in the government or in the scholars, being as, U.S. closer allies, how are you guys giving the checks, conveying the checks of these, I guess, behaviors? Or are you guys exploring different types of ways to convey the message to the U.S., right? Because seeing the role of how are we dealing with this? Because how do we cooperate with someone who seems to want to disengage, right? And this is the logic that we all are curious about. What's the discussion look like in Australia? Thank you.
Thank you, Wafa. Last question.
Greetings. My name is Aloysius Selwas Taborat. I am the coordinator for Defense and Security Treaties at the Indonesia's Foreign Ministry. I have two questions for Jenny, and also this can go to the discussions as well. But before, this is my first time in the Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum. I've been reading and listening lectures about Hadi Soesastro, especially on ASEAN, and it was, I think his writing was very futuristic. My first question with regards to the idea of institutions, both at national and international institutions, I would like to gain your insights more on this topic because what is your thinking about the idea of culture and political traditions when it comes to institutions? For instance, in the United States, in the Western liberal thinking, the idea of institution is anchored on individualisms and other values which perhaps is not correspond to other places such as in China. I think Henry Kissinger's on his book on China emphasis the idea of stability of the center, while in Indonesia you have these principle number 4 of Indonesia, Pancasila, whereas the emphasis on the consultations and consensus towards agreement. How do you think about this idea of different political thinking and culture in explaining about institutions? Because I think the idea for instance, from Acemoglu with regards to the inclusive have find many criticisms. So what's your thinking about this? And internationally, talk about international institutions, I think the UN Security Council is the most example of not inclusive because they have the veto powers, so on and so forth. My second question would be with regards on your specific recommendations on your last slides with regard to reforming international institutions. I guess you said that we need more rotating leadership and chairmanship. I think Pak Marty in this regard distinguished between chairmanship and leadership. And in my own experience as part of Indonesia delegation to the Security Council in 2019-20, Indonesia happened to have 2 times of presidency in the Security Council, both in 2019 and 2020. I think it all comes down to ingenuity when it comes to rotating chairmanship and then leadership as well. So how do you see this about, is it just okay to have a rotational, but do we need more ingenuity and innovations when it comes to leadership in international organizations? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marcelos. Okay, so we have 4 questions. I'm going to allow some time for Jenny to both respond directly to some of the remarks from the 2 discussants and also take up as many questions as you possibly can. Please.
Thank you very much. Boy, what a wonderful question. And thank you both to both my discussants for really insightful and I think adding very much to the sort of the framework that I outlined today. It's a response to one of the other questions too, is how do you convey checks on US behaviour? And I think, gang up is the answer. We do need countries to gang up because any one country alone really doesn't have much power against the United States, and it's only by ganging up and collective action that we'll actually be able to push back. And, develop a system that they want to then recognise that they used to benefit from and they want to be part of again. And that would be the way to do that. And the similar sort of story with China is we need to kind of be able to push back against some of the things that it might want as well. China's much more vested because its economy is much more vested in trade and investment. It is food and fuel import dependent. The US is neither. So the US can go isolationist. They'll be much poorer as a result of it, but they can do that. China can't. And its internal stability really matters. And so, if they're going to be worrying about maintaining their internal stability and their external growth options and the like is important for maintaining that internal stability. So they're in a different place. So I think if we, other countries can gang up on both of them and avoid that really bad scenario that I had in there of these kind of bubbles of influence that, you have to belong to one or the other, it's really problematic. But it's there's so many good questions. So it's where do we go for here? I really like the concept of untapped potential for cooperation, and I think you're absolutely right. So when I was chief economist at DFAT, I spent a lot of time with trade negotiators. And actually, my time at the Productivity Commission, we used to annoy them because we did something called the Trade and Assistance Review and kept talking to them about how they don't need, they didn't want to lower tariffs because they wanted to keep it as negotiating coin, because they took a very competitive approach to trade negotiations. And so part of the problem is that a lot of the briefing when they go into international organisations to negotiate is not about where can we find cooperative win-win solutions. It's here's my list of wants. And I do well when I tick off on my list of wants, and I do badly when I give on any of your list of wants that aren't on my list of wants. We need to spend more time, and this is where I think the research organisations can actually help, is trying to spend more time identifying where there are common wants. And so you can go through and go, well, at least, 50% of people or 60% of the countries want this. That's a really good platform then for saying, let's cooperate on that. So we need to switch from a competitive approach to a more cooperative approach in that looking for where those wins are. And that's why I suggested we have to be a bit ruthless to say, we know there's a whole bunch of things that are important, but commerce is the thing that's actually going to drive growth. And growth is really critical for alleviating poverty and bringing about reforms at home and moving people up that Maslow hierarchy of needs. So growth and attention, I think a very important point, is attention to how do we make sure that technology doesn't just favour a small proportion of the population and the owners of the capital. And I think that's going to be a massive challenge, and that actually might be about government being able to tax the people who are the winners out of technology and use that to redistribute. Now, how they redistribute is going to be a really interesting question, because you don't want to redistribute in a way that actually undermines the incentive to work. Right? So you need to think about creative ways to do that. That'll be different in different countries. So where does trust come from? I really love that question. Is it performance? Is it leadership? There's an old saying which says that trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. So it's really easy to lose trust, which I like that one. And certainly if you don't perform, if your institutions don't perform, you lose trust in government. But how do you restore it? Well, the best way to restore it is get institutions performing better, and slowly people will start realising that they do perform and we ought to value them. But that can be hard. So that's where leadership comes in. And we do actually sometimes need leadership is a really important element, because it takes people out of the area they're in and goes, life can be different. We can do things differently. And that's what we need leaders for. And having, the perspective of a really bad outcome can stir leaders to go, we don't want to do that. And we start saying, no, how do we avoid that? What have we got to do? Where have we got to move to? And unfortunately, what you got in the United States was general unhappiness about a lot of things, but the answer of Donald Trump has been completely the wrong one round. And so he's got leadership. You need somebody with his charisma and his ability to pull a crowd and take people with him, but you need them to have the right set of policies behind them. And so that's the challenge, is how do you do that? And how do we encourage that? And so one of the reasons I was so pleased to come and speak today is because, first of all, we need to know that we've got to change direction. And it's hard. You're absolutely right, it is hard. Things don't change fast, and it takes time. But if we keep going in the wrong direction, it's just going to get harder and harder and harder. So we need to start changing direction. We need to be aware that the policies we're doing are taking us down on what I call those vicious feedback loops. And we need to be thinking policy always about how do I stop those policies and how I put it in reverse. So I think, and that is domestic institutions and it's international institutions. Interesting comment around culture. Absolutely right. Spot on that one. And that is one of the reasons that I think you've got to find where the areas of common interest are. One of the things that I never really liked was this kind of like-minded countries, liberal democratic institutions rhetoric that was very big in the Department of Foreign Affairs, very much a US sort of driven approach. And we're finding now that we used to, as Australia, thought that we were like-minded with the United States, and we're discovering that actually they're going places that we don't want to go. And we are not as individualistic a society as the Americans are. We're quite different. We're quite collective, whether it's from our kind of colonial heritage or something, but we're rule followers, turns out. And so, those things shape your domestic institutions, and they shape the way you want to engage with foreign institutions. But this comes back to recognising that countries have different ways of doing things, and you shouldn't be imposing your values on another country because they've got their own way of doing things. And they will have different priorities, and they're in different places in that Maslow hierarchy of needs, so they definitely have different priorities, but they'll also have different ways about going about solving those problems. And so recognising that and valuing that, I think, is an important part. So it's, in some ways, this is a big wake-up call for Western arrogance, right? And I think, that's really what the quote I put up there from the Singapore diplomat was saying, these institutions actually are based on a bunch of Western governance principles, and they work pretty well. But what you can't do with it is then layer on that, and we want it to look like replicas of the United States or replicas of Europe or the like, because they're not. It needs to look as what are the common areas where we're going to cooperate. And that's why I sort of say do it around commerce, because commerce is a common interest and business operates the same. Believe me, China might be a communist country, but by God are they market-oriented, right? So they are a market economy, and the market works really well because they are entrepreneurial and they are willing to take risks and do things. And so I think that's the common element, right? We've got to find the ways we cooperate. We've evolved culturally to find the ways for our country, and culture is an evolution that's gone on. And so it's something to be valued, not something to be ignored, but recognising that it's going to be different across different places, and compromise turns out to be, compromise and pragmatism, I think, are really important rules, and sort of ways of behaving in this space. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Can I ask Pak Djisman and then Ibu Titi to also make some comments?
Very short, not on the questions. I think Jenny has responded very well. But I would like to take up the point made by Jenny. US turning isolationist, they can afford. I think, Jenny, no one can afford to be isolationist because technology forces us to be open. Imagine, where would iPhone sell the phones if US is isolationist? Where would Microsoft sell the system if US was isolationist? And we better be vigilant on this. The border between excessive nationalism and isolationism is not very wide. And let's remain vigilant, not to allowing forces to drive us into this block of super-nationalism. Institutional landscape is very, very, very slippery. A Democrat can turn into an authoritarian, and from authoritarianism to totalitarianism, there is also the danger of mutation. Yeah? So, once again, no one can afford to be isolationist when technology is driving us more dominantly than anything else. And I think the human-machine symbiosis has brought us to a point that we are truly now a partner of technology change. And anything that drives us to isolationism or supranationalism is going to cost us a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Fifi. So I just like to re-emphasize what Jenny already mentioned, that we have to ensure that we are always in the right direction. I like to re-emphasize or restating that not only that having institution that matters, but the good institution that serve the purpose. Yeah, we have lot of example. I'll take one that yes, we do Indonesia. Yes, we do have institution, the regulation, the policy on that particular issue. But it doesn't serve the purpose. For example, I just like to give one example on the competition, because Jenny mentioned in her speech that competition and cooperation are important. So it is important to have a market that works effectively. To ensure that market works effectively, you have to have competition policy, right? We do have competition policy in Indonesia, by the way. We have the law, we have the institution to enforce it. But if we look at, maybe if you can upload my slide, the slide after. If we look at how our competition policy and law perform so far, based on the few indicators that globally available, for example, the Be Ready, we are quite not up to the level, yeah. So, for example, the Be Ready said that we are not effectively enforcing the competition environment so that the company can operate efficiently, yeah. So Indonesia is in the red one. If you look at the right-hand side on the OECD product market regulation indicators, we can also see that Indonesia is far on the right, so that we are very restrictive in terms of market access of the company operating in Indonesia. So in domestic, because we are discussing this in CSIS, we always have to get ourselves alert that we are not yet in the right direction. First, because the institutional, for example, quality that I mentioned earlier, not there yet. On the competitive market and the efficient market is not there yet. So we have lots to work on domestically, let alone to work on the international issue. But luckily, Indonesia is the one that adopt open market enthusiasm. Yeah, we are accessing OECD because we want to be classified as OECD members, of course. But of course, by accessing to OECD means that you have to comply with the standard of OECD. So this is probably a good way of Indonesia to get itself into a higher level, to get it into the right direction that will bring Indonesia into a quality institution that needed to deliver this all. I think I stop there.
Thank you so much, Bu Titi. We have exactly 3 minutes, maybe only 2 minutes left, and I would like to give the 2 minutes back to Dr. Jenny Gordon for some, last remarks, and maybe leave us with some food for thought as we think into the future of your collective action. Please.
Thank you. Oh, gee, the big last words. I do want to make a comment on, we really like this idea of deregulation, right? When you have too many regulations. But that's when regulations don't actually provide a clear guidance for markets. They interfere with markets, right? So regulations that reduce competition are problematic, but regulations that enable competition are good. So I don't like the term deregulation because you actually do need regulations for competition to work. But that's the sort of test of it. Are you encouraging competition or are you undermining competition? Are you adding to costs and not adding to anything else, and not adding to public safety? And if you're adding to costs and public safety, that's when you have to kind of work out, is it worthwhile, right? And so this is where economics is actually, I think, a really important discipline. So I don't know how many people are economists here, but really thinking like an economist is a very important component. I think change is hard, rebuilding trust is hard, rebuilding international institutions when the members have very different wants from them. It's when you're facing a crisis, and the US has really brought it to a head. It was moving in that direction. This was not, it's just Trump is not kind of like an aberration. The US has been moving down this pathway. It wants to contain China. It doesn't want to lose its hegemony, despite the fact that Trump says that, the world has been ripping the US off forever. They don't want to remove all those advantages that they got from the world ripping them off, because actually they did rather well out of it and their companies did very well out of it. And the tech guys, really, very well made point, the tech guys don't want to lose international market access, right? And so there's a lot of levers there that can be played with to actually, if everyone else can come together and say, here's what a decent system would look like, here's what a system that countries benefit from look like. And this is why packaging is actually important. And so when I was talking about the leadership, you're right, rotating chairmanship is not what I'm talking about for reform. It's about electing a small number of people. 3 is always a good number because that's sort of from really different groups, to actually say, we are now here to drive the reform of this institution and come back to use the G20 as a negotiating platform for the package to say, you win some, you lose some, but you're doing okay. So, but it's actually forming those where the leaders in those countries commit, and they pick people who know what they're doing and they commit to reforming that institution. So that's what I think we really need to see happen to actually drive these reforms. I see it. Time's up.
Thank you. So on that high note, we have come to the end of the session. So once again, please join me in a round of applause to first Dr. Jenny Gordon for her brilliant speech. And also to Bapak Professor Djisman Simandjuntak and Ibu Titi Anas for joining us in the rich discussion. So thank you all of you that stays with us until the end of the session, and I hand back to our MC.
Test. Thank you very much for the thought-provoking lecture. I'd also like to say once again thank you for our distinguished speakers in this panel, Professor Jenny Gordon, Professor Djisman Simandjuntak, and also Ibu Titik Anas. And thank you for Bu Fifi for moderating this discussion. We'd like to invite you to come down off of the stage. Thank you very much once again. A round of applause, please, for our panel. Moving on to the next agenda, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to witness a tumpeng cutting ceremony in commemoration of 60 years of the ANU Indonesia project. First of all, I would like to invite Bapak Arianto Patunru, Policy and Engagement Manager of the ANU Indonesia project, to do the honor of cutting the tumpeng. For those of you who are not familiar with tumpeng, it is a traditional Indonesian dish with the philosophy centering on gratitude, community, and also spiritual connection, particularly from the Javanese culture. A round of applause for the first slice to be cut. Congratulations on the 60th year, and I would like to first call upon Bapak Yusuf Wanandi, Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees at CSIS Foundation, to accept this first slice. Inside of the tumpeng, there are also several different kinds of accompanying food, such as chicken and egg, that also symbolize gratefulness and other things. Thank you once again, Pak Yusuf. Next, I would like to call upon Bapak Sofyan Wanandi, member of the Board of Trustees, CSIS Foundation, to please accept this second slice of tumpeng. Please, Pak Sofyan. Another round of applause for the second slice of tumpeng. Thank you, and last but not least, I would like to welcome Professor Djisman Simandjuntak for the third slice. A round of applause for the third slice. Thank you very much, Pak Acho, for doing the honors of cutting the tumpeng, and also for our three acceptors of the slices of tumpeng. Once more, please give a round of applause for 60 years of the ANU Indonesia project. We hope that the Indonesia project continues to prosper throughout the years to come.